When my family would visit my grandparents when I was only 5 to 8 years old, I was convinced that I'd see an outline of a person standing in the basement doorway at nighttime. Like, totally 100% sure there was a figure standing there, only it was much too dark to make out any of the features, and it definitely was not any of my family members. The figure was much too tall. Everyone else would be asleep on their guest beds, and I'd be lying there in the darkness, unable to move, because I was so afraid. I remember my nightgown being soaked with my sweat, despite it being freezing in the basement. Like, I was that terrified. Anyhow, my grandparents ended up moving out of that house, but even then, once in a while back home, I swear, I'd see a shadowy person peering around the doorway to my bedroom. Again, definitely not a member of my family, as the figure was much too tall. A few years later, I mentioned it to my grandfather, who jokingly said it was probably a dead soldier looking for his whiskey. When I was a teenager, probably 16, I began developing really bad insomnia. Our house at the time had 2 stories and a basement, and was just on over 2 acres of land. So, close to the neighbors, but far enough away that there wasn't much neighboring. It was dark outside, and the lighting from their house was far enough away. One night, I was home alone with my younger brother, while my parents and youngest brother were at a hospital with my dad, who at the time had just had surgery. My brother was asleep, and I was just starting to go to sleep, around 3 or 4 in the morning, when suddenly I heard heavy footsteps downstairs, and somebody walking back and forth. Naturally, I thought somebody had just broken in, and I was terrified. I determined that if I remained quiet, whomever broke in would just take some stuff from the main floor. We didn't have many valuables, and leave without risking waking anybody up. When day came, it turned out everything was fine, and nothing was taken. There was no trace of any intruder. Eventually, I got it over a month, and about a month or 2 later, I heard it again, and again, and again, always between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., and always on the floor below me. My family doubted me because of the insomnia and my general sleep deprivation. One night, I was up really late with my mother, and we both heard it together. Not only that, but this time it was on the same floor as us. She just said, "No way. That's just Dad. I'll go look." When she came back, she looked surprised and informed me Dad was fast asleep. The validation was nice, but I would have preferred sleep deprivation hallucinations. Over time, the rest of my family would eventually hear it. We called it the poltergeist. It was never malicious, but one day, we found one of our hammers bent backwards, which was very weird. We set up a night vision camera, and eventually did capture the sounds on tape, along with what sounded like a glass set on the counter, and a heavy sigh. Unfortunately, we accidentally and stupidly taped over it when recording the Super Bowl. Mom, in all of her brave glory, once heard it in the basement, and went down to tell it that it was dead, and to go towards the light. If I recall, we really didn't hear it after that. When I was about 10, my grandpa died a day after Christmas Eve because of cancer. My grandmother and I turned off his phone, like really turned it off. It was some old Nokia phone, no touchscreen, just an old regular phone. We put it on a shelf and left it there. A week after his death, we heard an SMS tone of said phone, I was freaked out at this point because, well, it was turned off. I knew it. My grandmother took it down and gave it to me to open the text message, since she doesn't know how that works. So I opened it and gave it to her. The SMS, or text message, was from my grandpa to his own phone, and it read, "I arrived." Creepy as hell. The second story. When I was younger, I lived in a big house with different separated apartments, which belonged to my aunt. In there, I lived with my aunt, my grandmother, her medium friend, and a coworker friend of my aunt. The coworker brought her son with her. He was younger than I. The little boy woke up every night crying at the same time, so the medium had a talk with him. The boy said that there is a black man with a weird face in the room whenever he wakes up. The next day, the medium friend proceeded to cleanse the area, and I was watching her. She spoke at first calm, but then aggressive. I thought something happened, so I hid next, outside of the door at the wall. I always had a sense for weird stuff like this, and when I was little, I was feeling energy pretty strong at times. The medium later told us all that it was a demon hiding in this room. Now it's gone. Since the cleansing, the boy slept normally and without any nightmares. When I was between 6 to 10 years old, my mom and I lived in a house where I would be visited by something at night. It would always be preceded by a dream where I would be looking at a book in the back seat of a car, and all of a sudden, the words would start bleeding down the page. Was it a dream, or was I awake? As I would come out of the dream, I could feel a presence coming into my bedroom and looking at me. I would be awake with my eyes closed, terrified at what it could possibly be. I often felt like it was menacing. Eventually, I would fall asleep. Sometimes, though, I would scream out loud, and my mom would come in with a broom, saying, "Where is it?" trying to calm my fears. I used to stay home by myself as a kiddo, as my mom worked 2 jobs at the time. I would make jokes, looking at 2 Nintendo controllers, saying, "If there is something here, pick up the controller and play," acting like I was tough calling it out. Of course, when I would do this, rest assured, it would be there that night. We eventually moved out of that house, and all of these things stopped. Now, when I was much older, my mother would tell me that when I was younger, I would tell her, "You can't see them right now, but they are laughing at you." I don't recall saying that, but then again, I believe I may have repressed those memories. As an adult, I've told my wife about it. We both went back to that house, and she got out to go ask the current resident, who currently lived there, if they've experienced anything similar. She explained my story to the man who had lived there with his parents, since we had moved out many years ago. He had not. Well, once I got home from college, I started reading, and then went to bed. A normal night, I thought. So I dreamed that I'm drowning, and literally another person like me appeared in my dream. He just smiled at me and said, "You're going to die." Then I woke up, almost drowned. I wasn't breathing while I was sleeping, and I could not breathe through my mouth. I took a deep breath, went back to sleep. I literally could not stay awake, so I fell asleep immediately. Then I dreamed I was with a cousin in my room, and we were going to open the door. I couldn't reach the lock. He looked at me, smiled at me, told me, "You're going to die." I woke up again, and the procedure from before was repeated. I fell asleep again, and then in the dream, I'm with two friends, and I try to talk to them, but they wouldn't listen. Then they saw me, smiled, and said the same thing. You're going to die. I woke up again, but this time, I could not take a breath. I was literally not breathing. My entire body felt like it had tingles. You know, like when one foot falls asleep, only that it felt all over my body and hurt a lot. I also felt a loud ringing in my ears, as if my eardrums were going to break at any moment, and I also felt as if something was on top of me, and it would not let me move. I clarify, not so believing, but I was in panic. So, I thought of my loved ones, and that I cannot die yet. I mentally said, God, get this demon out of me. And this is where things get unreal. I felt my body contorting. I heard the cymbals sound loudly, and then a light came out of my body, and finally, I felt like somebody had pushed me hard in the middle of my chest, and I didn't feel anything else. I was able to breathe again through my mouth. I turned on the light in my room, and there was blood coming out of my nostrils. That night, I did not sleep, and I just thought okay, this is the reason why I could not breathe. And I did not give any more importance to the matter. I was trying to convince myself that I had dreamed everything. And when it was time to go to university, I undressed, got in the shower, looked between my chest, and I had a pretty thick cut there. Something deep, since there was still blood coming out. That's when I realized that had not been a dream. Listen, I don't know. Maybe somebody was playing a Ouija board that night with my soul. I'll never know for sure. I have a book of these because of this very old, strange place that I grew up, way out in the Idaho mountains. Because of the length of this story, I'm only going to tell one. If anyone cares to know, I'll be happy to share. So, I was and am something of a skeptical believer, in that I fully believe there are things in this world, and beyond, that we cannot fully comprehend or explain. But I think most claims out there can be boiled down to just a lack of understanding of things and or a desire for what they experienced to be paranormal. People who want to see ghosts, so when there's a trick of the light, they simply see a ghost. This place of which I speak is not such a far-reaching delusion as that. I grew up here. My adopted father was a roofer and an outdoorsman, and overall, a really great guy. He had friends everywhere. I'll spare you the full-length story, because a good friend of his was dying of cancer. He was called upon to run to this secluded cabin rental hot springs resort up in the mountains when I was just 6. I had visited the place frequently, and with my brother and stepmother when we would bring us up fishing or camping or hunting. I loved it to find that we'd be staying there. Even though my time was split between him and my biological mother down in town, I still spent most of my childhood in those same mountains, since I was 6. Aside from just loving the place for all the freedom I had, catching frogs, climbing trees, playing in the woods, swimming in the river, I think there were very few nights that I wasn't awoken in the night by something in that cabin. I'd wake up to dark shapes looming over me in the darkness that would recoil as I woke up. The sounds of things falling and breaking in the night, but in the morning, there was nothing broken, or the sounds of somebody walking on an old, creaky old floor, but nobody being there. I was amazingly unfazed by anything. I knew everybody else experienced things, but almost nobody would talk about it. I never really pushed, though. I was a kid, and when the day came, I was back up to my normal kid things. There was a night, though, that I think everybody had to acknowledge the question that strange things did indeed go on. At the time, the cabin we stayed in was small. There was no additions made to it, so it was one large room, except the bathroom. One main bed where the old man and stepmom slept. I stayed on a couch, and my brother slept on a cot. There was a loft that you couldn't stand in that was just mostly used for storage, but we all slept in the one room. No one was brothers since we all came from near poverty anyway. It was this one night that we all awoke to screaming and the loud clattering of everything, including the lamp on my stepmom's nightstand, being thrown across the room. Everybody went up with a jump, and my old man turned on his lamp, and we just saw stepmom sitting up in the bed, eyes wide and pale. She was still yelling, "Where is it? Look for it." When we all collectively asked what she was talking about, she just sort of quieted down. She made it very clear she did not want to talk about it, and that it must have been a dream. But after we all cleaned up the broken stuff and laid back down to go back to sleep, no one believed her. I don't think anybody slept that night. Even the next day, we couldn't get out of her what she had seen at the foot of her bed that made her freak out the way she did. We all doubted it was a dream, though. She made it very clear she never wanted to talk about it and wanted everybody to just forget that it happened. And you almost could forget that it never happened. Not long after, she convinced the old man to build an extension on the cabin to give them an actual bedroom. I never forgot, though. There was this glass angel figurine that stood about 1.5 feet tall that she had gotten at a yard sale years prior that sat across the room on the old box TV we had that was broken when she threw her lamp across the room at whatever it is she saw. There was a lot of stuff broken by accident that she just threw out, but she had tried to fix the glass angel, and so it sat there pretty well fixed, actually, on top of the TV for years until after she died, as a constant reminder of that night to me.